Hey friends, welcome to the pricing section of our course. In this section, we're going to be talking about things like setting your pricing, expenses, increasing your pricing, and even dive a little bit into things like setting your pricing for friends and family. Let's get to it, it's going to be fun. So before we dive in to these 5 questions that you're going to need to ask yourself when you're setting pricing, I want to give just a little disclaimer and let you know that all of the things I'm saying at this point, I am making the assumption that you've already decided what services you're going to offer. So I'm not going to cover that, but I want you to know I'm assuming you've already had that and you're ready to set your pricing for whatever products or services you're offering. Okay, so the first question I want you to ask is this: what is your capacity? And what I mean by capacity is how many projects or services, however you want to think about it, how many projects can you do in a certain time span. So I like to think about it in a couple different time spans, probably a month, and then 6 months, and also a year. So how many projects can you comfortably take on in a month? And if you have varying projects, then you want to keep that in mind. So how many websites, how many logos, that's something I think about. And then in 6 months, same thing, how many of each of the project types can I do? And then in a year, how many projects do I want to complete? I say this because your mental health and your creative health are so important, and they are so affected by the amount of work that you take on. So be careful to manage that workload and think about your capacity. The next question I have for you is this: what do you want to be paid after your taxes and whatever money you need to set aside for savings? What does that number look like? What does it need to look like for your income, for maybe going on a vacation, setting aside money for retirement? What money do you need at the end of the day? Another thing to think about is, what are people with your skill level charging in your area? I say skill level because maybe you're a beginner, so you want to look at what are other beginners charging. Maybe you're very experienced, or you've been in business for several years and you know the ropes, and so what are people like you charging in your area? You also want to think about your target market and your audience. So that might be local, that might be abroad, but what are people willing to pay in the scope of, I say area, but in your client base? What are they typically willing to pay? You want to keep that in mind because you don't want to way undercharge what they might be willing to pay. You also don't want to overcharge what they might be willing to pay. So keep those things in mind. The next thing I want you to consider is, what does your pricing structure need to look like? There's a couple different options, and you can even do a combination of these 3. You can charge an hourly rate, and all of your services can be based on whatever your hourly number is. The only downside to this is you only have so many hours in a day or in a week that you can do work. So it kind of limits your income capacity a little bit, so keep that in mind if you're charging an hourly rate. The next thing you can do is have a by project or by service rate, which is, for me, I design websites, and so I have a certain fee that I charge. If you want a website with these options, this is the price. The other thing you can do is have clients on a monthly retainer, and so you can just look at, okay, how many clients do I need on a monthly payment schedule to make what I need to make, and then you can just work on signing that many clients. Again, like I said, you can do a combination of all of the above. It doesn't have to be just one thing, but you want to consider that as you're moving forward in your pricing. The next thing I want you to think about is your expenses, and we're actually going to take a deep dive into that in a second, but I want to make one note. Some of your expenses are going to be directly related to the cost of your good or service. So if I have to rent a camera for a photo shoot, that is directly related to the photo shoot. But some expenses aren't going to be directly related like that. Things like rent or your light bill, different things like that. They're not directly related to the cost of your service necessarily, but you want to make sure that you include those in the price so that you're not coming up at the end of the month short because you didn't consider it. So let's talk about expenses. Now that we're talking about expenses, I want you to think about this. What are you getting paid? Sorry, let's back up. What do you want to get paid? So we talked about that in the previous section called pricing. We talked about what do you want to get paid at the end of the day. But then you might be realizing as you go on that what you're actually getting paid is not what you want to get paid. So let's find a way to meet in the middle. Now I want to tell you about a little equation that I use. It's very simple, not anything life-changing, but I think it's important to mention here. This equation is profit equals income minus expenses minus taxes minus savings and or charitable giving. So let's break that down a little bit. You've got your income, you should know that. Then you've got your expenses. I mentioned this a little bit in pricing, but I want to talk about it a little bit deeper. When you have your expenses, there are some that are directly related to the services that you offer. So if I'm designing a logo and I needed to purchase a font or some assets for that logo design, those are directly related to the cost of the branding suite that I offer. But there's also expenses that you have that are not related to that at all. So maybe your rent, maybe your light bill, any expenses, you'll know those a little bit more than me, but any expenses that you incur, you want to make sure you're including those in your pricing so that at the end of the day, you're not coming up short. So here's a way to compensate for that. First, I want you to add up all of your expenses that you have every month. Add them all up. Even if it's a $2 charge for online storage, literally all of it, just put it in a spreadsheet, add it up on a calculator, whatever you need to do, add it up. And once you have that number, I want you to take that and divide it by the number of projects or services that you feel like you have the capacity to offer in a month. We talked about that in pricing, so if you need to go see that, check that out. So you take your total expenses, divide that by total number of projects, and then that will give you an amount that you can then spread out to all of your services that you offer, and it'll kind of take the cost down a little bit for your clients. So it's not like you're dumping all of your rent on one client and saying, hey, you've got to pay my rent. But you're taking, okay, here's all the expenses that I have, and here's how I'm going to disperse that and make sure that I have enough income coming in. Hope that makes sense. Now that we've taken a look at your expenses, let's talk about increasing pricing, because let's face it, our expenses are going to be increasing every year. So you need to have a plan for increasing your pricing. All right, let's talk about increasing your prices. Wait, why do we need to increase our prices? Well, everything's going up, everything's getting more expensive, and you want to make sure that your business is insulated and ready and prepared to face the future. So I recommend you get your customers used to normal price increases. The way I like to handle this in my business is I let my clients know at the end of every year that my prices are going to go up. And I kind of pitch it to them like a deal. I say, hey, if you want to book a service with me and you can lock in the pricing from this year before my prices go up in the following year. So it's a really nice way to say, hey, if you want this deal, then here it is. And it's also subliminally saying, hey, my prices are going up. You are now familiar with the fact that my prices are going to go up. It's really helpful, really simple. And honestly, I don't usually have a lot of clients book and say, okay, I want to lock in your prices, which I'm fine because I'm fine for them to pay the next year prices. But it's just an easy, low confrontational way to say, hey, my prices are going up. If you decide not to increase your prices at the end of the year and something comes up maybe in the middle of the year that you know, okay, I need to increase my prices at this point. It can be tough to approach your clients, but here's a couple tips how to approach them when you have an increased price. Tip number 1, it's important to explain to your clients why your prices have increased. And I bet you have a reason why they've increased. So don't be afraid to communicate that to them. I personally love to understand why. It helps me feel more confident in things. So on the flip side of that, as a client, it might be helpful for them to understand why you're raising your prices. Tip number 2, be confident in your prices. You might feel a little uncomfortable when you're giving them, hey, this is my increased price, but be confident. If your client sees that you're unsure, they're also going to be unsure. So be confident and direct with your communication and with your pricing. Tip number 3. This comes in a little bit before you're actually telling them about your increased prices, but I think it's worth mentioning. So when you send out your estimates to a client and you let them know this is what we would bid a project, maybe you do that, maybe you don't, maybe you just verbally communicate the pricing. But it is important to communicate a deadline for that estimate. So they know that the price is not something that is quoted to them forever. It's something that has a shelf life. And once that is expired, you have the right to say, I'm sorry, we have a new price. It can be very helpful because you have something to refer back to, and you're not just coming out of thin air saying, hey, my prices are higher, but you can say that estimate was for this specific time frame, and beyond that, it's a new price. Increasing pricing can be tough, especially when it relates to friends or family. So that's actually what we're going to talk about next. Let's talk about pricing as it relates to your friends and family. Pricing as it relates to your friends and family can get a little bit tricky, but let's say this. Take a deep breath and don't worry, because these are the people in your life that love you and appreciate you the most, so they won't have a problem with supporting you. Let's talk about a few ways that you can help them though. First, you can explain the why behind what you do and add value to your services. Help them understand the work that you put into it, the time that you put into it. Honestly, this can go even beyond friends and family, just helping people understand why your work is valuable and why you do what you do. I'll also encourage you to stick to your pricing. It's important to believe in what you charge. So as much as possible, go ahead and stick with that. Now, if you do need to offer a discount, that's okay. I totally understand that. But you want to make sure that if you're reducing your pricing, you also want to reduce deliverables. You don't want to end up resenting someone close to you because of money. You just don't. You don't want to end up in that boat. So if you're reducing your pricing, also reduce what you're offering so that at the end of the day, you get what you need and they also get what they need. One thing to keep in mind though, when you are discounting, is that sometimes people will not value your work as much. So this is what I like to do when I do need to offer a discount. I like to communicate what the original price was so they know this is the value of what I'm getting at this discounted price. Typically when people know that, they'll appreciate what you offer more, and you will feel good about what you're offering, and they will feel extra appreciative for what you're offering them. All right, we've talked a lot about getting paid, but we haven't talked about how you're going to get paid. So let's talk about accepting payments. When you're accepting payments for your business, there's a couple different routes you can go, but mainly they're going to be in two different categories. You can accept payments online, or you can go for more traditional payment method. Let's talk about online payments, and then we'll go into more traditional methods. So you've decided that you might accept your payments online. Well, I want you to pick a platform. There's lots of platforms out there, and we'll talk about that more in invoicing, but the main thing is you need to pick a platform and you need to stick with it. When you're looking to choose a platform, you want to think about a few different things. You want to think about fees that might be included with the platform. So sometimes the fee structure can be different, but you want to think about that. You also want to think about, is it going to be an instant deposit? Is it going to take a couple days? You want to think about the timing of that. All of that is going to factor into the timing of your business, and you want to make sure you have something that you love how it works. If you select a more traditional method of payment, you will usually not have any fees associated with that. Maybe a banking fee, but for the most part, your fees will be less. So one thing that makes it fun for your clients is you can actually offer a cash or a check discount fee. You can take off, usually the fee for online payments is about 3%, so you can take off that fee and offer an incentive for your clients. That way you get paid quicker and your client gets a discount, so they're happy. Just make sure when you're offering a discount that you communicate the original price so that the client values your work at what it is initially valued at. You're still offering a discount, but you want to make sure that they know what you're giving them. It's been so fun talking about pricing with you. If you feel a little bit overwhelmed, take it in bite-sized chunks. You don't have to decide everything in one day, definitely not in 1 hour. So just take things as they come, and you're going to make great decisions. Let's move on and talk about invoicing.